Hedgerow too.
Guys, we got. Is it working? Why'd you shut it off? Is that better? Okay, there we go. Thanks for coming, guys. So we're over here in Clay County with Josh Lloyd. I'll let Josh kind of introduce himself, what he's doing as far as history and the history of this field. And yeah, and thanks for Colin for coming over here. You want to go ahead and put that on? That's for recording. That's not for this.
Okay, I was afraid I'd hit it. Okay, so the reason we picked this field to show you guys is if you look, you don't see any terraces because this was pasture, never broke out until probably 15 years ago, and we didn't till it. We just sprayed and killed the grass. And so what we have here is 2 foot of actual topsoil, carbon-rich topsoil. You hear people say when you get into good parent material, well, we have really deep topsoil. That's not topsoil. They have really good silt. They were blessed with silt rather than clay or rock or sand. So we were going to compare this side of the road where we have the topsoil to the other side because it's night and day difference. That's really orange, a lot of clay content, whereas this is really, really dark soil. So this was wheat. We planted a cover crop. We haven't got a lot of rain, so it's pretty spotty, but you can't see them here, but there's about 1,500 sheep just on the other side of the hill here that we'll see when we go by, and it's going to graze them here. A lot of people I know would worry about the pigweeds, but one of the things with sheep is they will eat the pigweeds. They like the pigweeds. That's how they complement the cattle. Is the cattle mainly want to eat, kind of focus on grass and then a little bit of broadleaves, whereas the sheep, they'll eat the broadleaves and then a little bit of grass. So whatever your cattle stocking rate is, you don't have to change your cattle stocking rate when you add sheep. And then here next week, I'm going to go pick up some goats, because if you look on that hill up there, we just bought that farm, that pasture. Most of it has been broke out. Most testing. Most of it has been broke out at some point in its life. There is a little bit of native, but that's probably 160 acres of just solid trees. So I'm hoping, rather than go in there with a skid steer, and at some point in time we'll probably have to do some of that, but in the beginning I wanted to put some goats in there to try and clean it up, and then as time goes on, use them in all the other pastures to eat all the woody species, so we don't have to go spray trees or snip cedars. So do we want to, where's Tyrell? Do we want to put a spade in the ground now? All right.
You can hold it. Microphone?
Yeah, if we can get it in the ground. And I will say, this is one of the things we started doing, and this farm has probably been cover cropped pretty much since it was taken out of native pasture, is if in the fall, if we're not planting wheat, everything gets planted to rye now. And then in the summer, for the last 25 years after wheat, usually it was double crop beans that we would plant. I'm starting to plant more double crop corn, so all that green back behind you that's not regular corn is double crop corn off in the distance, because I'm wanting to start to build carbon, because the difference between this side of the road and that side of the road is carbon. When the glacier retreated 10,000 years ago, it was just parent material, and then through plants and animals living and dying on it, that is what actually built the fertility. What do you want to?
Yep,
Oh, you got something?
Yep.
Well, let's bring it over here then.
I went and put a pothole out there for you.
I'm surprised you could get something in the ground. So essentially, the way to is that had this on it 150 years ago. But this all got eroded away through tillage, and now we're down to that level. So what I'm trying to do, and the way, if we want to turn this back into this, you can't be tilling the ground, because you're going to either erode it, you're in a negative, right? You're losing it through wind erosion, through water erosion. Plus, as you're tilling the ground, you're putting oxygen into that soil, and it's burning your organic matter off. That's the number one destroyer of soil. The number two destroyer of soil is fallow. If it's just sitting there and there's no living root, so it's just sitting all winter, basically your soil biology is going to be eating on your carbon as a food source, and you're going to lose your ability to infiltrate water and your soil structure, because that's another thing that we've seen where we've been over 25 years of no-till, and now adding the rye for the last 3 or 4 years, it's really helped with infiltration. I mean, before we were always kind of unhappy because we'd get those heavy spring rains and things wouldn't move as bad as in a tilled field, but you'd still get some micro erosion in the field, right? Now we don't get any of that. Everything just stays put, and that makes when you go out there and you're doing your burn down and spraying your residual herbicides, your herbicides are going to stay in place instead of washing out in your terrace channels anywhere you get that micro erosion. So I don't know, any questions? Anybody else? Comments? Yeah.
So you think adding the rye in is all about the organic matter, or you think it's the living root matter? Which one do you think is actually getting you the most benefit right now out of that rye?
I guess the way I think about this is kind of the same thing. I mean, carbon. So organic chemistry is the study of carbon, and so all living things are made of carbon. Probably, the roots are the most important part compared to the top, but you got to have both, right? I mean, my goal is to constantly be harvesting sunlight. I know that's hard for people to sometimes get their minds wrapped around, but it really, you cannot let things sit fallow. Like this shed over here, and this windbreak was built in. They put that in 1955, maybe a little before that. My dad was born in '48. He remembers going out and watering it. There's a terrace that runs by that shed and then through my yard. So the point I'm trying to make there is that farm was all tilled for most of its life up until 1955. Then for the next 50 years, it was a feedlot where we would background cattle in the winter. And so most of the time, probably 6 months or more out of the year, it would sit fallow and grow nothing but pigweeds. Probably sat more than 6 months. But when you go in and you soil sample that, and then when you look at the growth, right to the fence line that we took out in 2005, the organic matter in there is 6%, versus you come across the field, it's 3%, and that's after 20 years of no-till without what I would call the winter spring cover. So there wasn't, in that feedlot where it's got way more nutrients, it's got way more carbon and organic matter, we weren't adding urea or 1152 or 28%. What were we adding? Just biomass, right? Silage, bales of hay that we would grind up, grain, and that was passing through the steer and depositing in that spot. So the reason I give this example is that soil in there was built strictly by importing plant material. That's how important plant material is. So when how many guys cut their wheat and then bale their wheat straw and then haul it off, or so, you just can't do that. I mean, you're giving away your carbon, and it's too important from moving from here to here. If you're exporting your plant material, you're moving towards this. And this soil here has actually been no-till with cover crops for 25 years, and it still looks like that. I mean, that's how, it's on an end. He probably was on an end row, and I suppose maybe you went.
I walked in.
You walked out there a little bit.
I bet 6 to 10 rows, something like that.
And you stayed away from a terrace, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I stayed away from the gravel. I tried to find not a gravelly area.
Yeah. Because there, where it's along the road, there's some gravel, and then on the reason I asked about the terraces is we feathered the terraces down on that place, so it could be a little misrepresentative if I'd feathered all the. But yeah, the point is.
It captures the difference in color.
Yeah.
Because when we were out here this winter and looking, it was.
That's what it looks like.
Completely obvious difference in color, and I was worried where you've been dry that the color wasn't necessarily going to show up. But
Yeah, I was too.
It still absolutely does.
And I'll even say, over time, now this gets grazed pretty hard, but I was a little bit. I mean, when it first came out, we didn't have near the platiness. So, I mean, this soil has gone backwards, I'll say a little bit, just because, probably because of the beans would be the biggest drawback. I mean, that's one of the, like I said, the reason I'm moving away from beans is beans do not build soil. That whole legumes fixing nitrogen thing, they may fix their own nitrogen, but the credit you see is because their carbon to nitrogen ratio, when it's all said and done, is very narrow. Whereas this, if you're in wheat straw, milo stalks, any grass, your carbon to nitrogen ratio, if it gets mature and heads out, is going to go to 90 to 1. And so then I think I turned it off again.
So what?
I think hold on. I'm fidgeting with or hitting the power button. Am I back on?
Yeah, you're good. Yep.
So an example I'll give with the rye cover crop on paying attention to your growth stage and your carbon to nitrogen ratio. If you're planting rye and you come in April to plant corn and that rye is still vegetative, the carbon to nitrogen ratio is still very narrow. So if you spray it and kill it, it is going to break down and release those nutrients back relatively quickly. However, if it gets to the point where it's heading out and where it's going to make straw, the carbon to nitrogen ratio goes to 90 to 1. So if you were planting corn into that rye straw, you would need to add probably 60 more pounds of nitrogen to offset that wide carbon to nitrogen ratio. Otherwise, the biology is going to starve the corn, because it's going to take the free nitrogen that's in the soil and use that to try and break the straw down. And so you've got to get some nitrogen out there to give so that there's enough excess that the corn plant isn't starved. Because even compared to a native ecosystem, if you think about it, Rick Bieber uses a fan as kind of an example. When you're a monoculture, it's like having a fan with one blade that's just lopping around, right? And the more diversity you can get as far as plants, and then adding livestock, the closer you can get to a native ecosystem, you start adding blades to where the nutrient cycle, the water cycle, everything starts to mimic a native ecosystem. Because in a native ecosystem that's relatively, that's undisturbed by man, I don't know if there is such a thing hardly anymore, but if it's relative, there still are areas, say that, Amazon and other places, you do not see nutrient deficiencies in the plants because you have cycling going on. The only place we see nutrient deficiencies is in our cropland, because if you look at if you stop and think about all the differences that are between the two, I mean, we have just completely imposed our will and essentially nuked our cropland, and so that's why we're trying to keep something growing all the time and bring livestock back, and we're seeing some improvements. Across the hill here was the first perennial break that I took out last year. It went to soybeans. The second perennial break that I'm guessing we'll go look at is just a half a mile further down the road. But one thing I noticed and took a picture of this year was both those fields. That first perennial break, after I harvested the beans, got planted to rye, and then the field next to it, there is a patch that's just like this that was never tilled. And one of the things I noticed and snapped a picture of was how deep dark green the rye was, where I had the perennial break for 6 years, plus I bale grazed. So not only did I have a perennial that was taking advantage of any rainfall when it came, we also were importing biomass in the form of bales and then rolling bales out. Sometimes I've got some pictures where we were just setting bales and then moving the rings and letting them eat as we went along. But it looked just like the rye that was on this soil down by the pond over here. So I know the science is there, the theory's there, and you don't need, you just need that's really what science is just observation. So, the practices all make sense. It was just confirmation that it is making a difference. So,
Josh, I would like.
yeah.
Hello, everybody. I am Joaquin from K-State. I would like to add something related to that question because I think it's very, very important to discriminate the difference between the roots and the biomass itself. Here in the rice systems, the most important nutrient that we are looking for and we are fighting for is the rain, right? However, the rain could be the most harmful parameter in our systems. So, regarding to the root role there in the ground, to keep that structure together, that would allow us to give more buffer capability in our soils, are the roots. We realize that the healthiest systems is the natural system, but we cannot keep the fields in natural systems because we need to grow food, we need to make money, we need to get profitability in the farm. So what does it mean? We should keep the cover crops to get that role of the biomass, roots living there, the microbes, because the power that that relationship between the microbes and the roots has is the most powerful tool that we have to keep the buffer there in the ground. By another way, the biomass will provide us that role that we need to increase the organic matter on the soil in the medium long term. So for that, it's very, very important to take care about that ratio that George mentioned. We are going to build biomass, mainly carbon with grasses, but then the same microbes need nitrogen to eat that biomass and produce the organic matter in our soil. So we need to take care of two main things. We would like to keep something green on the field always. Why? Try to replicate the natural system. We're right. Always one crop there growing. Provide us that synergies between microbes, organic matter, recycling the nutrients, because every time that we harvest a summer crop, we relieve on the field a lot of nutrients in the stubble. So that cover crop is going to take those nutrients, hold it for a season, 4 months, 3 months, 5 months. We have to be very aware to decide the burn down timing, because we don't want to steal the water for the following cash crop. But those are the main goals. With the biomass, try to build as much biomass as we can without having a penalty in the cash crop, and try to keep everything green on the field to still have that good synergies in the structure of the soil. I come from a wheat science team that most of you will think, oh, what those things related to cover crops are related to weed management, chemical, sprayings, everything is related at the end. And probably later on, we are going to stop by one experiment there and see how having a cover crop, having a high biomass system will impact in the weed management strategy and practice as well.
Okay.
Josh,
Yeah.
when do you terminate your rye then, if you're going to
I mean, if I guess right at planting or right after planting, I try not. So I guess when you terminate it is before it makes seed, which usually it's going to maybe start making seed around May 15th. It comes on in April 1st, and then by May 15th, it's probably already making seed. So it's just, we don't want to terminate it until we've planted it, because if you terminate it before you get it planted, then it becomes a nightmare to get it planted, because as dry as we've been, of course May is when we were getting our rainfall. I had 2 fields that they weren't going to corn, but they were going to beans, that we struggled to get them planted, because you figure you had rye this tall, and when it kind of broke over, I mean, it was shading the ground. And I've got one field, it's one of the fields out by Wells, where I was grazing it with cattle, and once the disadvantage with rye is, compared to say oats, is once the rye starts to head out, livestock don't like to eat it. And we got busy, couldn't get over there and get it terminated. Well, I've got a roller crimper on my planter, and so it made seed, and we just rolled it. That's part of the reason I took the planter over there instead of using the drill, is I wanted to roll that rye down so that I wasn't getting rye seed in my beans, which there have been times, I've done some relay cropping where I'll go in the end of April and with the air seeder on 15-inch spacing, seed beans into it, and then the beans are growing up underneath the rye. We'll come in, harvest the rye, and then the beans are already there. So it's kind of like a double crop, only you're getting an earlier start. But yeah, the keys to managing some of your rye would just be probably try and get it terminated before it makes grain, so you don't have volunteer issues, and then wait and burn it down after you've planted.
So when you do that, soybeans into the rye, and you're planning to harvest the rye also, what spacing do you use for the rye? You're using 15 spacing.
Just, yeah, 15-inch spacing on the, or no, 7.5-inch spacing on the rye, and then 15-inch spacing on the beans, so that, I mean, I've got pictures, it also depends on the stage of the rye. It's kind of like wheat, when you top dress it, depending on the stage, you can run over it and knock it down, but it'll stand back up. You will knock some of it down, but like with the rye, it doesn't, because of its root system, I don't put any fertilizer on. It has basically zero inputs. Anytime I put fertilizer on, it might get me a few extra bushels, and this is just my experience, so yours may be different. But it just seemed like all it wanted to do was go to straw and not grain.
You mentioned using rye and maybe oats. What about triticale?
Yeah, triticale. So the reason I landed on rye is because I wanted something where I've already got wheat in the rotation. I wanted something as far away from wheat as possible, and triticale, has half of its genetics are wheat, and then with oats, it carries some of the same diseases and insect pressures that wheat does. So that's the reason I went to rye. There's no issue with any of the others. And like I said, I want to kind of go back. I want to start planting more oats because I don't have a lot of native grass. I mean, the reason, as we go look at these perennial breaks here in a second, or the one, the reason I had that is because I'm basically grazing windows. So you figure in the winter, they're out on a cover like this if there's anything left, or on corn stalks cleaning it up. You know, there's not going to be a lot of growth from any rye or anything that's been planted. But once April 1st rolls around, I don't have a lot of rye growth, but I have enough acres of it where the whole farm's planted to it where I can turn them out, and I have an abundance of rye grazing for a month and a half, till May 15th, let's say. And then at May 15th, I can take them to the native pastures. They're there till June 15th, July 15th, maybe upwards of August, so 2-3 months. And then I hope to pull them, then I pull them off and hope to graze them on a grazer planted into wheat afterwards. So, you know, you got to give it a month or a month and a half. I mean, this year's been stressful because we're not getting a lot of rain. We didn't get the best stand. I don't know. One of the things I'm thinking about doing differently is the seed I've been getting has not been treated. And most, kind of the heart of the mix is sedans. And I'm thinking about diversity, like your sun hemps and all those things, maybe not be treated. But I just think with, there's just too much chinch bug pressure and things like that where this year, and you'll see it over here on this, where you see a bunch of rye stubble, you know, that got planted and we had terrible stands, and there's basically nothing there right now, whereas next to it we had better sedan.
Go ahead and give it to Colin. But yeah, just real quick on the sedan, just make a comment. That's one thing that Nick and Bryce Custer from Western Kansas.
We know agriculture around the world. No-till has been a wonderful innovation, but if that area there has been no-till for 20 years, that paddock there, obviously there's something missing from no-till on its own. And the main thing that we're finding now, the main thing missing is plant diversity. Old Mother Nature had the problem solved here with huge plant diversity. And this area here, especially if we go back to the original prairies and grasslands, and I'm not sure how many species were in your grassland, that 300 or 400 species at least would have been in here. And yet we're planting a monoculture crop here, wonder why we can't get the gains. And that's why multi-species crops or multi-species covers work, because we're starting, and only starting, to mimic old Mother Nature and natural systems. For no-till to work even better, we need more plants. Plants drive everything, as we know from this field here. So the more species we start putting into these mixes, and the closer we get to our original grasslands or prairies, the better, and then we'll start to get agriculture functioning really well. Because Mother Nature had it right in the first place. And that's probably all I need to say at the moment. And the introduction, I mean, this is a wonderful example of what's achievable. As good as that, probably that soil's improved a lot, but we've got an example here of what we can do.
Yeah, so to Colin's point, I mean, this over here was no-till for 20 years, but it sat fallow every winter. So it sat fallow for 6 months of its life. And that's where I was, you know, I've seen the improvements is from the 3 years now where we've introduced rye, and not letting it sit fallow over the winter. is where we're starting to see better gains, because otherwise, yeah, you kind of just plateau out on what you can achieve. And also to get the diversity, really the only place we can add lots of diversity if we're going to be in a cropping system is kind of the grazers after wheat. And that's where you can't see it in the spot we're in, but maybe if we get over here, there were a diversity of plants, but this is an opportunity to get your diversity, because everywhere else you're going to just be planting monoculture corn, wheat, and beans.
Do you apply any seed over like the corn field before you harvest?
No, and I talked to Dwayne Beck one time because I was going to maybe try and make some sort of get a high boy sprayer and an old one and just convert it into something I could go broadcast, but we just don't get enough rain here. It's just too hit and miss for the investment you're going to make, and if you're counting on it to feed cattle or livestock, I think it's just better to probably go try and get it in the ground. You can, I mean, everybody, that's just, I've had some things flown on. I wasn't happy with them. Doesn't mean it can't be done around here. It didn't work the couple times I did it, and I gave up. But if I don't want to encourage anyone to go off of that, because we wouldn't be doing half the things we're doing if I listened to people who tried it once and said it doesn't work.
Josh, when you said grazers, is that like a multi-species summer cover crop?
Yeah, so the grazers and is where I get all the diversity. So what I try and do is the Sudan is cheap, and mung beans seem to be cheap, and sunflowers are cheap, and so I try and get some of the cheapest stuff, and then the way I add the diversity is in small amounts of the more expensive stuff. But it's part of the reason I go with rye is nothing will frustrate you more than if you go spend a whole bunch of money on some exotic mix and then it bombs, right? I mean, to me, starting out, start with things that you know will grow. We all know Sudans grow, so get some diversity of Sudans, sunflower, mung beans or soybeans, and then sprinkle in your diversity to try and, get your diversity of plants to get your soil built up.
Do you fight rye in your wheat rotation?
Not really. So my rotation, I don't have a set rotation, but if I were to tell you a rotation, it'd be wheat, corn, bean. So that last rye crop where we go bean and then back to wheat, I'm very cognizant of getting that rye killed before it goes to seed. If it goes to seed earlier in the rotation, I've got lots of opportunity to clean it up, but you don't want it to go to seed the year before. You could end up with a real mess. It isn't though like rye that I think a lot of people talk about. I mean, my rye, I don't know if they could pick it out of the wheat. It just looks like shriveled wheat. It's not, I'm assuming the rye that people complain about I've heard is dark, and I don't know, it's more wild rye, or is it just regular rye? I don't know, it doesn't matter, but that's kind of what I do. That's what I do to try and keep it out of the wheat. Because the people that worry about that, I mean, I was born in '73, so I'm old enough to remember. I probably started running a combine at least by the age of 13, a 7720, and I can remember we'd be cutting wheat and the cheat would be so bad in spots, we'd have to jump out and open the return elevator because it would plug. We had buckwheat and bindweed. We don't think about any of those things anymore because of rotation, and I think rye would be in that list. It's just something you'd have to watch a little more.
You had a question.
We have a guy that's taken the Glacial Hills Peggy interseeder now this year. So if anybody that would like to interseed into the corn here in Columbus County, where I see we have somebody that's
Okay, so there is an interseeder rig around if anybody wants to use it. Is it still sort of subsidized by? No, no. They just they bought it to. Okay, okay. Ready to move
Any
to the
other
next
comments,
spot?
Colin?
No,
No?
that's fine.
So if you guys haven't seen, this here is it's called the slump test. This really isn't the best representation because the stuff that I put in from this sample, kind of some bigger quads, but I couldn't get them to break up. But if you come and feel it, the middle of these quads are wet, where this one is completely even. And again, you see the color difference. Like Josh was saying, both Ocho and Colin saying, the difference is the history and the carbon.
2012.
So we got an infiltration ring over here.
Those are the times I got
Just
my
to
money back.
see how it does
I just
real quick,
stood in the back
and then we'll go to the next site.
Okay, so you had the same. Yeah.
6% organic matter, and then 3.
This is probably I'm going to say 5 probably. It might be up. There's be spots where it's 6, and then that down there. Yeah, I think it's 3. I mean, when we started